This is the Mountaineer Podcast, where everybody's listening. The Mountaineer brings you stories from the peak to peak, in print, and online. Now, listen in to the latest news of the area. Nederland's new childcare center is in hot water. In less than 3 weeks, Teens Inc. is supposed to welcome dozens of children to the $7 million building, but the center might not be able to open its doors at all. Welcome to the Mountaineer Podcast. I'm Tyler Hickman. Today, we're taking a closer look at a developing story around outstanding fees Teens Inc. owes to the town of Nederland that could delay the opening of its much-anticipated childcare center. Senior reporter Chris Kelly will join us later on to give us an update on what's going on and how the town's decision could potentially lead to utility rate hikes for Nederland residents. Before we get to this week's top stories, we've got a quick word from one of our sponsors, Gilpin County Parks and Recreation. September marks the start of fall fully, and the Gilpin Fairgrounds Frenzy is the perfect time to enjoy it. Stop by September 12th for shopping, rodeo, and a trip to the stars. Peruse the annual flea market and the last artisan market of the season. If you're feeling spacey, check out Fisk Planetarium's Traveling Star Dome and get your kicks at Buck for the Fallen's 10th anniversary celebration with Bulls Bronx. Festivities start at 8 a.m. and go all day. For more information, check out the Gilpin County Parks and Recreation on Facebook. We'll see you there. Now, let's get to the headlines. Boulder Valley School District is proposing to close 6 schools in a new plan to address the district's declining enrollment. BVSD presented the Resilient Schools proposal to the Board of Education this week, which includes closures and relocations impacting 16 schools across the district. The plan comes in response to a decade of declining enrollment, leaving the district at 67% capacity, with nearly 5,000 empty seats. Among the closures are Boulder's Douglas Elementary, Mesa Elementary, Flatirons Elementary, and the Community Montessori School, along with Broomfield's Birch Elementary. Student bodies would be moved or reorganized into new locations throughout the district. The board will discuss the Resilient Schools plan at its September 8th meeting and plans to make a decision on September 22nd. You can sign up for public comment at both meetings at the link in our show notes. If the proposal is approved, changes will take effect starting with the 2027-2028 school year. Gilpin voters are set to see a de-bruising measure on their ballot this fall. Residents will decide this November if the county should be allowed to retain and spend revenue above limits put in place by the Taxpayers' Bill of Rights rather than return the surplus to its voters. According to the county, Tabor returns on property tax would send roughly $13 to each resident next year. If voters elect to debruce, that money instead will go towards county infrastructure and maintenance. Voters can expect to see the measure's language when they cast their ballots this November. And finally, the Nederland Fire Protection District has identified the noisy vandals responsible for the town-wide cell phone and internet outages last week. Chief Charlie Schmidtman reported that one or more busy woodpeckers severed a fiber optic line that cut internet and cell services for all carriers in the area. The report states services were down for 16 hours starting on August 15th, but many residents experienced diminished access until service was restored on the 18th. Schmidtman said battery backups on landlines, quote, go out pretty quick when they experience outages. So they use satellite internet provider Starlink to maintain communications. For now, no solutions are on the table to keep the woodpeckers at bay. Those were this week's top headlines. You can read these stories and so much more in this week's print edition or at the mtnear.com. Now, we're going to hear from reporter Chris Kelly about the potential delays to the grand opening of Nederland's new childcare center, set for September 14th. A few weeks ago, Teens Inc. director Stephen Lefevre appeared before City Council with a bit of a surprise. The nonprofit can't afford to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in utility fees owed to the town. For the past 3 weeks, the Board of Trustees has been weighing its options on what to do, and whether the town can afford to have Teens Inc. default on these payments. Chris Kelly's got the scoop. Well, thanks for joining me today, Chris.
Thanks for having me. My pleasure.
So I think to really get started here, I would love to understand what exactly these PIF fees are and how much Teens Inc. owes. Can you explain that to us a little bit?
Right. So specifically, PIF stands for plant investment fees. The town defines them as being meant to address the capital impact that's made by a new development. So the use of the town's water and wastewater infrastructure, the pipes, the pumps, and subsequent demand on the treatment plants. So that's really what they cover. And Teens Inc., all in all, they owe $361,582.
Okay. And then my understanding is that these fees are kind of like more or less, they are an upfront payment to essentially tap into the water and wastewater utility systems through the town of Nederland.
Right.
So it's a large chunk of change, $360,000 some odd dollars. And a few weeks ago, Teens Inc. showed up at City Council. This was an unanticipated appearance. They showed up at City Council with a plea to delay the payment of these tap-in fees. Can you take us back to that? What exactly is going on with the situation?
Yeah, that's right. It wasn't on the official agenda. They had sent a letter. And so it was addressed at the very end of the meeting, kind of covered as public comment. So Stephen Lefevre, the executive director of Teens Inc., he had 3 minutes to really make his case. And if you listen to the recording, you can actually hear him rushing through all of that he had to ask, because it was a big proposal. And so really, though, this conversation about tap-in fees started 2 years ago in 2024 when Teens Inc. and the town were negotiating the lease agreement. That was the first time that Teens Inc. asked for, at that time, a complete waiving of the fees. It wasn't even a payment plan that they were suggesting. In fact, a trustee at that time on the board suggested that Teens Inc. could possibly benefit from a payment plan because the board had awarded that to another business just 2 years prior. They had allowed them to have, I think it was 36 months or something payment plan. At that time, Teens Inc. asked for a complete waiving of the fees, and it was estimated that the fees would be around $150,000, $200,000. And of course, that wasn't the case just 2 years later, and it's over $300,000. In fact, someone even joked that would Teens Inc. accept the fees to be capped at $200,000, in which Stephen Lefevre said, yeah, absolutely. But that wasn't really on the table. So back then in 2024, it was determined that Teens Inc. would be completely responsible for all their utility costs. And at that time, again, Teens Inc. was waiting for this $800,000 in congressional funds that they end up not getting, just like they have in 2026. They said then that money, if they were awarded it, would go right to paying the PIF fees up front. So 2 years later, Teens Inc. Find themselves in an even worse financial landscape than in 2024, and are now asking for the fees to be not waived, but to work out. Their suggestion was a 5-year payment plan.
Okay. So I guess for some additional context here, it would be good to talk about what exactly the tap-in fees are for. It's a $7 million childcare center that they've been constructing, and it's set to open on September 14th. Can you give us an idea of what types of services this childcare center will offer the community, and why exactly this childcare center is so important to the town of Nederland? What was the idea behind bringing this to the town in the first place?
Yeah, really good question. It is definitely a $7 million project. That's huge. And so where did it come from, right? I feel, more than it was Teens Inc. bringing this to the community's table, it was really the community that made it clear to Teens Inc. that there was, more than just a need for childcare in the area, but it was really kind of growing into a crisis, a crisis that, young families, just so many of them had written letters and shown up in public meetings, that this crisis was threatening Netherlands' ability to retain young families and allow them to thrive here, and was also threatening the local elementary school population, which, just as the Boulder Valley School District is kind of evaluating shutting down some of those schools. So it was a big alarm bells for Teens Inc. And so, they had the knowledge, the know-how, already operating in the childcare space. So they saw an opportunity where, with town-owned land that could accommodate what this area, not just Nederland, but the really the peak-to-peak area needs. So the building is rated for up to 65 children before it's considered at capacity. They'll be accepting kids as young as 6 weeks old, up to 7 and 8 years old. And affordable childcare for everyone has always been kind of Teens Inc.'s ultimate goal, even in the face of receiving zero support federally and from the state. They're still willing to work with people of all economic backgrounds that to be able to afford childcare. And as for the number of spots available right now or for opening, I can't say that for sure. In our last interview, Stephen Lefevre did state that there was 73 people on the pre-registration list. And out of that, 60 of them wanted to start immediately as soon as the center's doors were opened.
Yeah, so pretty much full and expected to be full almost immediately if they open on September 14th. But I know that these tap-in fees have created a few issues and raised some questions on whether or not September 14th will be the official opening date. But kind of before we get to that, I think essentially Teens Inc., as it stands right now, cannot afford to pay the tap-in fees by September 14th. So the board is considering pathways forward. Can you kind of explain to us what those are?
Plain language is they make them pay for it. They owe the fees as it is. And if that means that they don't open in September of 2026, then I think that, that's it. That's really the only recourse in that situation is that Teens Inc. would have to postpone their opening date. The original opening date was actually 2027. So they're a year ahead of schedule. So that's the first option. The second option would be the payment plan, and the third option would be to completely waive the fees. And the board in their last meeting, the board of trustees ended up tasking town staff with providing them data on what a 5-year payment plan would look like and what a 3-year payment plan would look like. And they also asked Teens Inc. if they would consider making a large initial payment in 2026 if they were offered this payment plan, and Teens Inc. was agreeable to that. They also asked Teens Inc. to consider paying interest, which the number being tossed around was 3%. And then they also asked Teens Inc. to come back with more information on their existing properties and using those existing properties as collateral. So that would be the child care center, the $7 million center, and their teen center on East Street.
Yeah. And what really complicates all of this is that a large portion of that $360,000 is already factored into the town's utility budget for 2026 and 2027. I'm not 100% sure what the distribution is on that, but they are depending on that money coming in the next few months and being able to use that. What kind of complication is this going to create for the town if they either defer these payments and spread them out or completely waive them? It's got to affect something.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's going to affect the 10-year capital plans that the utilities department has for both their water and wastewater infrastructure. So and the town has already been embroiled in these plans for the last 2 years. So because any payments to Netherlands utilities, it goes straight into an isolated enterprise fund. Any impacts to their estimated revenue for 2026 and 2027 would have to be rectified within that enterprise fund. So meaning that a loss of expected revenue will cause some of those capital improvement projects to maybe be delayed, rescheduled, maybe even reconsidered. And if they were looking for a way to compensate for the loss of revenue, they could consider rate hikes across the board. So for all ratepayers.
Yeah. And we don't have that number just yet. It sounds like they're kind of exploring that with what the terms of a deferment would look like. There's a lot of factors that are going into this. But I think that we had some rough numbers on like what that $360,000 works out to per utility customer. And it's not a small number.
Right. As far as those exact numbers, the town might be presenting those at the next Board of Trustees meeting on Tuesday, September 1st. But what the town has released is more of an approximate cost per account as a result of Teens Inc. not paying their fees. So it comes up to roughly $461 total, and that's accounting for both the water and wastewater. So that's pretty significant.
Yeah, that's per resident, right?
Yeah, per ratepayer, yep.
So obviously not a small chunk of change that they need to make up, and we still don't know how it will actually affect the rates and when it could actually affect the rates, if it's going to actually affect the rates. But one of the things that's really kind of stuck out to me in all of this is that Teens Inc. initially was kind of expecting to have the money to pay for it. And some congressional funding issues have left them short of $1 million. What's going on there?
Yeah, short $1 million is for such a huge capital project is monumental, right? Like, and like I said, in 2024, Teens Inc. was in the same situation where they were expecting roughly $800,000 to $1 million in congressional funds, and in that situation, they just weren't awarded the funds. In this situation, when I interviewed Stephen Lefevre after that initial board meeting where he brought the proposal for a payment plan to the board. In that interview, he showed me a letter from Hickenlooper's office that said, you have been awarded these funds. And shortly after that, they were told that their request for funds needed to go through another round of consideration and that the organization needed to fill out another application. The second application contained some language that inferred that the childcare project may not be considered because the construction of it had already begun. And Lefevre said that wasn't a condition in the original application, the one that they filled out and received a notice saying that they were awarded it. So the second application all of a sudden mentioned a stipulation that they weren't aware of, and to this date still aren't sure if it will affect them being granted that money. At least I haven't checked in a week or so. So unless they've received it really recently and have paid their obligations with it, I don't think we would hear about that until the next BOT meeting.
So yeah, we find ourselves in this situation now. What's coming next? We have a meeting next week, I believe. What kind of decisions, what kind of discussions can we expect that's going to happen, which is going to be 2 weeks out from their planned opening date of September 14th.
Right, exactly. Yeah, so we're really down to the wire, so I'm sure they're going to want a decision soon. So I would expect, and we'll see, usually the agenda for the upcoming Tuesday meeting is released on Friday. So this Friday, hopefully, we'll get some more clarification as to what they're going to talk about. But I believe they're going to weigh their options, look at that data from the 5-year, what a 5-year plan looks like, what a 3-year plan looks like. Andrew Bliss with the Utilities Department will also be at the meeting to discuss planned rate hikes that they had already planned before this Teens Inc. issue. So there's going to be sort of a crossover conversation there, with the town's Utilities Department talking about what ratepayers can expect, and then discussing whether there's going to be any additional expectations levied on top of that from their decision regarding Teens Inc. And then, so they'll talk about, and also talk about those collateral options and see if that and the 3% interest is enough to, I guess the right word would be satisfy the town. Yeah.
Awesome. A lot of big decisions coming next week, it sounds like.
Yep, so absolutely. Fun stuff.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining today. Chris, is there anything else?
No, I think that pretty much covers it. Thank you so much.
One more thanks to Chris for jumping on the mic today. As he mentioned, we can expect a decision next Tuesday, September 1st, at the Nederland Board of Trustees meeting. You can attend in person or join online. We'll drop the details in the show notes. That's all for today. If you liked today's show, you can do us a huge favor by sharing it around with your friends, neighbors, whoever. It's a big help and one of the best things you can do to help us grow. As always, you can like and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts to get the news the moment we hit the airwaves. Once again, this is the Mountaineer Podcast. I'm Tyler Hickman. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week with more news. See you then.
City back to my hometown. Everything seemed different but the same. I can't tell if anything's changed or just the inside of my head. I can't find out tonight. I'll just keep drinking instead.